hardest conversations are the ones we never realize we're having. Not with another person, but with ourselves. Every single day, our minds are quietly telling us stories. Stories about people. Stories about the world. Stories about who we think we are. Most of the time, we never stop long enough to ask ourselves, is that story actually true? Or have I simply believed it for so long that I stopped questioning it? Writing at night has a funny way of slowing those thoughts down. Out here, there aren't many distractions. Just a motorcycle, a quiet road, the sound of the engine, and enough silence to finally hear your own mind. That's one of the reasons I love these rides so much. Because somewhere between the miles and the silence, the noise in my head starts getting quieter. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because I finally have enough space to actually listen. And I've noticed something. The older I get, the less interested I become in winning arguments. I'm much more interested in understanding people. That wasn't always true. There was a time when I thought every misunderstanding needed an explanation. Every accusation needed a defense. Every harsh word deserved a response. But somewhere along the way, I realized something. Not every thought deserves my attention. And not every misunderstanding deserves my reaction. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is simply pause. Just long enough to ask ourselves, what am I really responding to? Is it this moment? Is it this moment? Or is it something much older? Because sometimes the loudest voice in the room isn't the other person's. It's the one inside our own head. The one reminding us of every time we were disappointed. Every promise. That was broken. Every goodbye. We never saw coming. Those memories. Have a way of trying to protect us. And that's understandable. But sometimes the same walls that protected us yesterday keep us from seeing the people who genuinely care today. Maybe that's why I've been thinking so much about the way we see people. Not just what they say, but what we believe they mean. Because those are not always the same thing. Sometimes a person's intentions never actually make it to our heart. Instead, they pass through every painful memory we've ever carried. Every disappointment. Every betrayal. Every broken promise. Every moment. That taught us to be careful. And by the time those good intentions finally reach us, they don't always look the way they started. I've wondered how many relationships have been damaged. Not because love wasn't there, but because pain translated it into something else.
That thought
has stayed with me. Because I don't think any of us are born expecting the worst from each other. Maybe. That's why I've been asking myself a different question lately. Not did they misunderstand me? But what have they lived through that could make this moment feel completely different than it does to me? I don't ask that. To excuse hurt? I ask it because understanding and agreement aren't always the same thing. Sometimes you can understand why someone feels the way they do without believing their conclusion is true. I think that's one of the hardest parts of growing. Learning to have compassion without losing yourself. To listen without carrying everything that isn't yours. To care without believing you have to fix every hurt because sometimes the most honest thing we can offer another person is simply our character. Not a perfect explanation. Not the perfect words. Just a life that stays consistent long enough. For people to see your heart. You know, I keep coming back to something I said earlier about the stories. Our minds quietly tell us. The more I think about it, the more I realize those stories don't usually begin today. Most of them were written a long time ago by moments that left a mark. By people who never realized how deeply their words would stay with us. Maybe. That's why healing takes so much time. Because we're not just learning new lessons. Sometimes we're gently questioning old ones. Not all at once. Just one quiet moment. At a time. One conversation. One decision. One ride. Until one day. You notice the story in your head doesn't sound quite the same anymore. And then there's the other side of this. The side we don't talk about very often. What happens when your heart is genuine, but it isn't received that way? I've wondered. How many people have quietly stopped loving well because they were misunderstood. Not because they stopped caring, but because they became afraid. Of caring. That's a different kind of pain. The pain that quietly asks, maybe I should stop trying. Maybe. That's another story. Our minds tell us. That because one person couldn't receive our kindness. No one ever will. But is that story actually true? Or is that pain trying to protect us too? Because maybe pain doesn't care. Which side of the conversation you're standing on? It whispers. To both people. Maybe. That's what grace really is. Not pretending. That hurt doesn't exist. Not pretending. Everything is okay. Just choosing. Not to let hurt be the only voice. We listen to. I've learned that life becomes a little quieter when we stop assuming we already know. What someone else meant. That's not easy. Sometimes our first thought arrives long before our best thought. And maybe Real growth isn't getting rid of that first thought. Maybe. It's deciding that your first thought doesn't get the final vote. I like that thought. Because it reminds me that growth doesn't usually happen between one day and the next. It happens between the first thought and the second one. You know, one of the things I love about riding at night is how honest it feels. There's nowhere for your thoughts to hide. No notifications. No distractions. No one asking. Anything from you. Just miles. Engine noise. And time. Enough time for the noise to settle. I've noticed that the longer I ride, the less interested I become in proving that I'm right. And the more interested I become in finding peace. Because I've learned those two things don't always ride together. Sometimes you can win the argument and lose your peace. I've done that before. It wasn't worth it. Not once. Funny how The road has a way. Of changing the subject. 1 minute. You're lost in your own thoughts. The next. You're looking at a sunrise. Or a line of trees. Or a bridge. You've crossed 100 times. But somehow, it feels different tonight. Maybe. The bridge didn't change. Maybe. I did. I've learned that growth rarely announces itself. It doesn't send you. A notification. It doesn't wake you up. One morning, and say, "Congratulations. You're healed." No. Usually, you discover it. In a moment. When you almost reacted. The old way. But you didn't. And maybe that's what healing looks like. Not becoming someone completely different. Just slowly becoming less controlled. By the pain that once made every decision. I used to think that healing meant never having the old thoughts again. Never feeling the old fears. Never hearing that familiar voice. Inside my own head. But I don't think that's what healing is anymore. Because sometimes those thoughts still show up. The difference is that they don't stay. As long as they used to. They still knock. I just don't. Invite them in. For coffee anymore. I let them pass. Like headlights. Coming the other direction. They're bright. For a moment. Then they're gone. Maybe. That's another thing. The road has been teaching me. Not every light is meant to be followed. Some lights are simply passing by. The same way. Some thoughts were never meant to become beliefs. Sometimes I wonder how many people are carrying around an older version of themselves. Not physically. Mentally. Emotionally. Still introducing themselves to the world. As the person they used to be. Even though they've been growing. This whole time. I think we do that. Because the past has a louder voice than progress. progress. Is usually quiet. Almost shy. It doesn't ask. To be noticed. It just keeps showing up. One choice. At a time. One conversation. At a time. One ordinary day. At a time. Until eventually. You realize. The person you've been trying so hard to become has quietly been becoming you. I think that's one of the reasons I love ordinary rides. Nothing extraordinary. Has to happen. For something inside of me to quietly change. Sometimes it's just a green light. Sometimes it's the cool air. Coming through my helmet. Sometimes it's watching another rider going the opposite direction. Just a wave. Then they're gone. But somehow, it still reminds me that none of us are riding completely alone. Maybe. Life is a little like that too. Some people only cross our path for a moment. A conversation. A smile. A kind word. Something. That seems so small. in the moment. Until years later, you realize you still remember it. Not because it changed your whole life, but because it quietly changed. One Direction. And sometimes One Direction is all it takes. The older I get, the more I realize peace has been around. Far longer than I have. The sunrise. Doesn't ask. If I had a bad day yesterday, the wind doesn't care. Whether I won or lost an argument. The road doesn't remember. The mistakes I made. Last week. It simply waits. For me. To write it again. Maybe. That's why I feel so at home. Out here. The road has never asked me to pretend. It has never asked me to be perfect. It only asks that I stay present. 1 mile. At a time. Maybe. Peace isn't something we have to find. Maybe. It's something we stop interrupting. You know. There's something about riding that doesn't let you. Live very far outside the present moment. You can't. Ride tomorrow's road. You can't. Break. For yesterday. You only have the road. That's in front of you. Maybe. Life has been trying. To teach me. That same lesson. Not by making life easier, but by reminding me where my attention actually belongs. I've spent far too many years trying to rewrite chapters that were already finished, only to realize I was missing the page. I was living maybe that's another reason I keep coming back. To these rides. They remind me that life is happening right now. Not yesterday. Not tomorrow. Right here. One mile. One breath. One heartbeat. At a time. I wonder. How different our conversations would become if we spent Just a little less time. Trying to be understood. And a little more time. Trying to understand. Not because it's always fair. Not because it's always easy. But because every once in a while, you discover that the person standing across from you has been fighting a battle you never knew existed. And suddenly, the conversation changes. Not because anybody won. But because someone finally felt seen. Maybe. That's something. We all need a little more of. Not people who always agree with us. Just people who are willing to sit with us. Long enough to understand if you're listening, to this tonight, there's a good chance you're carrying something. Maybe. It's something nobody knows about. Maybe. It's something you've become really good at hiding. The funny thing about carrying things for a long time is that eventually they start feeling normal. You forget. What it felt like. Before you picked them up. Maybe. That's why. We don't always notice how tired we've become. Not because we're weak. Because we've been strong. For a very long time. And maybe just maybe that's why you needed this ride. As much as I did. Maybe. That's all. Any of us. Are really trying to do. Carrie. A little less. Understand. A little more. Forgive. A little sooner. Notice. A little more beauty. Along the way. Not because life suddenly becomes easy. Because it doesn't. Some days. Are still going to hurt. Some conversations are still going to sting. Some misunderstandings may never be resolved. And maybe that's okay. Not because they didn't matter. But because they don't have to decide who you become. That part. Still belongs to you. It's funny. how a long ride can make you realize you didn't need all the answers. Maybe. You just needed enough quiet to hear yourself again. I think that's what these miles have always given me. Not perfection. Perspective. Not certainty. Just enough clarity to take the next mile. And maybe that's enough. Maybe. We've been asking, life to show us the whole journey. When all it has ever promised was enough light for the next stretch of road. And somehow that's always been enough. You know, I've noticed something. About the end of a long ride. The closer I get to home, the quieter my mind becomes. Not because I solved everything.
Because I stopped
trying to solve everything. There's a difference. Some questions. Don't need an immediate answer. Some hurts. Don't disappear. Overnight. Some stories take a long time to understand. Maybe. That's okay too. Maybe. There's wisdom in letting some things unfold. At their own pace. The same way. This ride did. One mile. Never trying. To become the destination. Just faithfully. Becoming the next mile. As this ride starts coming to an end, I find myself thinking less about the questions I still have. And more. About the miles. I'm grateful for. Every conversation. Life has given me. Even the difficult ones. Because somehow they all left something behind. Sometimes a lesson. Sometimes a scar. Sometimes a little more compassion for someone else. For myself. Maybe. That's the gift. Hidden inside. Every mile. Not certainty. Just little more understanding than we had. When we first turned the key. You know, I don't think this ride changed my life. I think it simply reminded me of the life I'm trying to live. One built a little more. On understanding. Then assumption. One built a little more. On curiosity. Than fear. One built a little more. On grace. Than judgment. And maybe I'll forget. Parts of this conversation. That's okay. Because maybe the only part that really mattered was the one your heart needed tonight. If that's the case, then this ride was worth every mile. Thank you. For riding with me. Until next time. Take care. Of yourself. Take care. Of each other. And if life feels heavy, remember, you don't have to ride every mile. All at once. Just the next one.